the 4 approaches of collective bargaining. We said it is piecemeal approach, package bargaining, or we had the basket approach, and we had take it or leave it approach, right? I do feel that everything was clear when we discussed about different methods of collective bargaining. If there is anything that you could not recall, please let me know before I start with bargaining techniques. See, the bargaining techniques as such the term technique in English is more narrower in meaning than the term approaches. It boils down to how basically we are going to do it. We find that the most common techniques would be the review of the past negotiation. Whatever happened in past, we take a stock of that to start with. Then the second technique would be that, there are many people involved in the collective bargaining process. There will be a team of people from both sides, say 4 or 5 people from each side. And if everybody starts talking, then no fruitful results can be achieved. And therefore, it is advisable that we always nominate a person as a spokesperson, and other members would be helping that spokesperson with the data and figures if required, or try and give him any kind of feedback when the spokesperson is not able to, communicate on his own, then any other member can step in. We also find that there should be informal meeting between the formal meetings, because by nature, collective bargaining is a process in which heated exchanges sometimes occurs, and in order to cool it down, if there are informal meetings, that is always helpful. If you find that there are points where no agreements are reached, then recess and adjournments can also be done so that we can recollect things and get back later on. Similarly, approach should be flexible and keep tempers and tensions and self out of the reach as far as collective bargaining process, the techniques are concerned. We also find that sometimes people start bluffing, which is not advisable in a collective bargaining. Honesty should be there, so bluffing should be avoided. But by nature, it requires counter proposals to be put. If some demand is there, then counter proposal can be had from the other side as well. Sometimes we'll require some kind of theatrics, and emotional factor must be controlled. Avoid should be conflict, conflict should be avoided at all times, and we must try and find areas of common interest and agree to that. Alternate proposals are always advisable because sometimes the proposals are not agreed to, then you bring in an alternate proposal. There is a difference between counter proposal and alternate proposal. Counter proposal is from the opposite number, whereas alternate proposal is by the same team. There has to be concession closure, and there has to be avoidance of publicity as far as bargaining technique is concerned. Now, another thing we have is called collective bargaining strategy. Now, basic objective of all negotiation is to reach a mutually satisfying agreement, which is beneficial to both parties. And therefore, for behavioral scientists, satisfying agreement can be reached by employing any of the four strategies, as they call it. The first strategy is break off negotiations, so that the other person try and come after you. Make a proposal which is more worthless than the last one. But these are negative strategy. But positive strategy would be to persuade the other side, other party to concede, and the best would be that seek coordinated movement. Right? So these could be the four strategies that we talk about. Over the years, what we find is that large number of strategies has been applied. And this gentleman called Domenico Gigliando, he has analyzed and described some strategy which are still valid in the collective bargaining process all over the world. That is capitalizing on the general economic and political situation. When the political situation demands or economic condition demands, we should have to capitalize on that. If economy is going up, we can get some concessions. If politically we find that there are disturbances, then we can have the collective bargaining to get more. Timing of negotiation is also very important. This timing is pertaining to the financial year. Say, if you look at a particular year and divide that into 4 quarters, the quarter beginning, the first quarter of the financial year is, of course, ending June. The second quarter, of course, is ending September, right? And likewise, we have got third and fourth quarter. In the first 2 quarters, there is no pressure on the management for achievement of targets, whereas in the last quarter, management is hard pressed for time and increasing the resources, increasing productivity that can be utilized by the workers group or unions. Whereas for the management, it is always advisable to have it in the first 2 quarters because that is more convenient for them and they can pressurize the workers during that particular period. We also find that a planned course of progressive action is, of course, the best strategy that is to be followed. We can also have a strategy of selectivity, not taking everything, but the most important ones. Advance strike vote is one of the strategies that Algerians are very famous for. And conditioning public opinion in favor is also a very, very important kind of a strategy. Sometimes we need to, seek governmental intervention so that government pressurizes the other party to concede. And attitudinal structuring or restructuring is also a strategy that is required. The last item in collective bargaining is called the tactics of collective bargaining. There are 2 types of tactics. The first is that those intended to gain advantage for the side employing a particular tactics, and the tactics intended to help persuade the other party to accept one's viewpoint. Now, as we all know, that tactics is something which is termed as negative. It's a negative term in English because tactics are short-term things where you gain advantage in the short term. Whereas if you look at collective bargaining, this is going to give you results in the long run. But for collective bargaining process, not all tactics are negative. We have got positive tactics as well. So here we are using tactics not as a negative term. Some well-known tactics are here. Initial high demand. That is, if only 5 genuine demands are there, or demands are, say, we want an increase in wages of 10%, but we demand a 25% increase in the salary. So that kind of initial high demand is there. There is always counter proposal from the opposite side. So this is a technique as well, counter proposal, but here we are employing this as a tactics that if, say, the workers demand a 10% increase in wages, the management can say we want a 15% increase in productivity. We are ready to give it, but with an increase in the productivity that is there. Salesmanship is applied in collective bargaining as a technique. Bargaining from weakness is sometimes very, very important, where you show yourself weak, but otherwise you are not. Power balance is also where you show that you are as powerful as the opposite party. And strike vote is yet another tactics of collective bargaining. Trade-offs are another tactics of bargaining. Synchronizing is a tactics of bargaining. Tempers and tensions, which are artificial in nature, is a tactics of bargaining. Delaying and stalling is also one of the tactics that management normally applies. But the best tactics, of course, is use of facts. Okay? So these are some of the tactics of collective bargaining that we encounter as far as collective bargaining process is concerned. Another topic that is there in your syllabus is called workers' participation in management. Right? Workers' participation in management. That is participative management that we talk about. Now, what is participative management? And why it is important? We find that if you go by what Karl Marx said that workers are treated as somewhat like a slave in the industry. Whereas if you look at Gandhiji, what he said when he went to solve the problem of industrial action in the city of Ahmedabad during the 1920s, he said that workers are co-partners. Therefore, what we find that if they are co-partners, their participation has to be there. Now, the term collective bargaining means we find different things to different people. Now, for the basic concept, workers' participation is not the same thing as industrial democracy. Because democracy is, of course, the ultimate goal that should be achieved by the collective bargaining process. That is for the benefit of the employee. Therefore, workers' participation is a process rather than the end that we find as an industrial democracy. Now, workers' participation is thus an essential step in the direction of industrial democracy. It is believed that workers' participation in management enhances productivity, efficiency. It increases industrial industrial peace, and it also enhances the employee personality as such that is there. If you look at it further, the term workers' participation means different things to different people, different interest groups, depending on their objective expectations. For example, the first group called management. For management, it is joint consultation before decision making. Why consultation is important? Because as and when you wish to bring about a change in the any system in the organization, there is always resistance from the employees. There is resistance to change which is built into the system, and therefore what we find that in order to reduce those tensions, in order to reduce the resistance, we have got to do consultation with management, with workers before you implement any change that is there. But for the trade union, it is the harbinger of a new order of social relationship and new set of power equation within an organization, where they feel that it is their right and therefore it has to be there. But for the administration, it is an association of labor with management, but without final authority or responsibility in decision-making process. So decision-making will remain in the hands of management, but you are having cooperation from them, suggestions from them. Now, if you look at the characteristics, we find that participation has to be at different levels of management. Now, participation implies practices which increase the scope of employees' share of influence in decision making at different levels of organizational hierarchy. Participation presupposes willing acceptance of responsibility. Participation is through workers' representatives. The broad goal of participation is automatic management or auto management system as is practiced in Germany. Now, what are the objectives? See, the objective of workers' participation is to establish a good communication system between management and workers. It is also to promote mutual understanding between management and workers. It is also to create a sense of belongingness among workers and prevent alienation and exploitation. Because if you keep working, alienation is something that is very, very common. You get bogged down. Just excuse me for a second. Now it is to, we said, also promote resistance to, reduce resistance to change. It creates sense of involvement, sense of inducement, and it is also, we find that there are different levels of participation. This is from lowest level to highest level of participation. There are five different levels. That is informative participation. We have consultative participation. We have associative participation. We have administrative participation, and we have decisive participation. Informative participation, as it is suggested, is considered to be the lowest level of participation, where workers are basically being informed either in a meeting or through circular about the decision that management is making. Consultative participation is where workers are being consulted upon, suggestions are being invited, but ultimate authority for decision making rests with the management. Associative participation is where decision is being taken by the management, but the implementation of those decisions, which is directly affecting the workers, would be taken by the, they will be associated in those implementation process. Administrative participation is where these people participate administratively rather than making any decision. But decisive participation, which is the highest level of participation, where workers are involved in the decision-making process, and it is the representation of those union members are in the highest level of management, that is the board of directors. Now, there are various schemes of participation that is found in India. This is the first one called Works Committee. Now, the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947 provides for the establishment of Works Committee in all organizations employing 100 or more workers. Now, what we find that Bombay Industrial Relations Act of 1946 also provides for the establishment of Works Committee. Right? But Bombay Industrial Relations Act was only applicable to the state of Maharashtra and Gujarat combined. But once the central act came, that is called the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947, it is applicable to the whole of India. Now, what we find that Works Committee is a consultative body, and its functions include monitoring working conditions. Mind it, it is a consultative body. So the third level of participation we're talking about. These working conditions will include lighting, ventilation, sanitation, amenities like drinking water, canteen facilities, medical services, management of welfare funds, educational activities or facilities that is to be provided to the children of the workers. Now, the office bearers that was suggested in the Act of 1947 is that there has to be a president who will be representative of management. There will be vice president who will be representative of workers. A secretary and joint secretary were to be elected at the floor, and the tenure was said to be 2 years. Total strength of the Works Committee should not exceed 20. Meeting was to be held every 4 months, and all decisions were to be taken by consensus rather than by voting. The second machinery that we have in India is called JMC, or Joint Management Council. The second 5-year plan recommended for the setting up of Joint Management Council consisting of the representatives of management and workers. What happened that if the second 5-year plan recommended for it, and a team was constituted which visited countries like United Kingdom, France, Belgium, and Yugoslavia, and submitted its report in 1957, in the light of which this committee was established. Now, JMC, the objective was to increase the association of employers and employee, thereby promoting cordial relationships between the two parties. It was also to improve operational efficiency of workers. It was to provide welfare facilities to workers. It was to educate workers for participative management and to satisfy psychological needs of the workers, which was envisaged. The criteria for setting up of JMC that was suggested by this committee under the second 5-year plan was that all units in India having 500 or more employees should establish a JMC. Those organizations must have fair record of industrial relations and must have well-organized trade unions available with them. It's said that both parties, if they agree to establish a JMC, can establish it even otherwise. The private sector companies should be member of a national employers organization, and trade union should be affiliated to a national level federation in those organizations where JMC was to be established. The office bearer was chairman, who was representative of management, vice chairman, representative of workers, secretary and joint secretary to be elected by the members. The tenure was said to be 2 years maximum. The total strength was to be 20, like the works committee. Meeting was to be held every month rather than every 4 months. That is the case with works committee. And decision, as usual, would be by consensus, not by voting. The third scheme is referred to as worker director scheme. It was in the year 1971 that the government of India introduced the scheme of workers representation on the board of directors of public enterprises. To start with, it was Hindustan Antibiotics Limited, Hindustan Organic Chemicals Limited, and 14 nationalized banks that was done nationalized in 1969, and Port Trust of India was to have workers director. The goal of worker director was that it will have, give enhanced feeling of enhanced status to workers and unions. It will play an active role in policy formulation, and it was considered to be democratic as well. But there were certain apprehension on the part of management. Some people in management felt that workers director ceases to be a worker, and hence there will be a gulf created between management and between the workers and worker director. It also, workers felt that bargaining power of the union will get reduced once they get a director serving on the board. And it was also felt that it will lead to class conflict at the board of directors level. And some people felt that company secrets will be divulged or leaked by the workers director, who is not all that secret. He was not considered to be a confidential person. Now, we all know that, the Indian political and industrial scenario during the beginning of 1970s was considered to be very, very bad. The incidents are quite common. We had a war with Pakistan to get Bangladesh independence, and Indian government sent its army for that war and got Bangladesh separated from the Pakistan. A war is always costly, and industries had to function. It was at the same time that the socialists were up in arms, and there were massive strikes and problems in the industries. The leaders on that forefront, of course, was late George Fernandez, Snehata Gupta, and others. And it was at the same time when railways had a problem, it was running as little as 36 hours late. Such was the condition. And the Baroda Dynamite conspiracy was also thatched during the same period of time. And therefore, in order to bring the workers in the fold of peace, the government of India brought in two economic programs. One was known as 20-point economic programs, and there was a 10-point economic programs. It was the 20 points economic programs where many schemes were being launched. One of such schemes was known as shop council, and they said that the shop council should consist of an equal number of representatives of employers and employee. Here all decision was to be taken by consensus, and decision to be implemented within 1 month, that they said. It was somewhat as a replacement of works committee, because the formation of works committee was, and shop council was the same. It said that it will have chairman, vice chairman, representatives of management and workers, secretary and joint secretary to be elected, tenure 2 years, and meeting every month rather than every 4 months that was there in works committee. The function was to improve production, monitor productivity and efficiency, monitor absenteeism and try and reduce it to the maximum. Safety measures were to be looked at. Working condition was to be monitored and revised and made better. Health and welfare of workers was a concerned area we said they will look after, and it was to establish two-way communication between management and workers. Another committee that was suggested was joint council in line with the joint management council. All organizations employing 500 or more workers should have a joint council. The joint council should consist of an equal number of representatives of the employer and employee. Here, all decisions were to be by consensus as usual, and decision to be implemented within 1 month, because the earlier bodies did not talk about implementation of those decisions. He said it will fix productivity norms, take matters of which remain unresolved at shop council. Health and safety was important. Area of function, optimum use of raw material was also suggested, because wastage was being created by the workers in protest. Quality management was accepted at this particular point of time. In 1977, when the Janta government came to power, defeating the Congress, it extended the facilities of joint council to even those organizations which employed 100 or more workers, right? So what we find that these were the schemes which apparently seems to be very, very novel kind of a scheme, which was to give participation to workers. But in reality, what happened that it existed more in theory than in practice. Those organizations which established it, it said that they will meet every month or they will meet every 4 months, as was the case with Works Committee and Shop Council. But the meetings were more sort of a decorative, because those people who got nominated to become the members sided management more than any worker. And the management felt that this body is there, therefore everything will be solved by them. And the workers' power was in a way reduced by these bodies, and they could not succeed. And therefore, workers' participation in management remained more a decorative thing rather than any fully functional kind of an idea which was there. Now, what we find is that if you look at these functions, as to how it happened, we find that these measures that we have were all meant to prevent the dispute, because it was felt that if you can prevent the dispute to occur, then the problems of the industry will be solved in the long run. Whereas if you look at these functions, if it was not to solve the problems, then the problem would be paramount. And therefore, what we find is that if you look at these measures which are there, it was all preventive in nature rather than providing much solutions to the problem which was there. Just a minute. What is happening here? There is some problem. I'll just solve it. Try and solve it. Just a minute.
Sir, we can see it now.
You can see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Functions, right? Function slide.
Right. No, the function slide is not the one that we are talking about. We're talking about different slide which is there. Can you see this slide? No.
No, sir.
Okay, I'll just try and get it as it comes. Okay. No, no, no.
Sir, perhaps
Okay.
you could try presenting your entire screen.
No, no, no. It is there. Now you could see it. Yep.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Now, those were, we said, the preventive machinery that is there. Now let us look at the settlement machinery. The first kind of, you know, thing that we have got to look at in settlement machinery is referred to as mediation. A mediation is a process in which two or more people get involved in a dispute, come together to try and find a fair and workable solution to the problem. See, mediation is something that is very, very common. Even in the families, when when siblings gets involved in some kind of a dispute, we find that elders gets involved, or they approach the elders to get the problem solved. Uh, if two countries are at war, they approach the United Nations for that particular purpose, which plays the role of a mediator. This process is accomplished through the use of mediator, who is a neutral third person or third party who is trained in cooperative conflict resolution. So not everybody can be a mediator at the organization's level or industry level. They have to be somebody who is trained in cooperative conflict resolution, right? Now, the concept of mediation in India, if you look at, is that it is something voluntary in nature. It is not compulsory. The mediation is a party-centered negotiation process. Mediation process is informal rather than formal. Mediation, in essence, is assisted negotiation process. Mediation provides an efficient, effective, speedy, convenient, and less expensive process to resolve dispute with dignity, mutual respect, and civility. Mediation is conducted by neutral third party. We call them a mediator, and mediation works together with parties. The parties have got to be agreed to a mediation. The mediator employs certain specialized communication skills which they have. Therefore, we said they have to be a trained people. A mediation is private process, and any settlement that is reached is required to be reduced to writing, signed by the concerned parties, and filed in the court of law if it has to become compulsory. Otherwise, it remains voluntary in nature. So these are the basic process of mediation. We said introduction, understanding the problem, deeper understanding of the interest and needs of parties, defining the problem, creating options, evaluating process, and settlement or non-settlement that is there. Now, what we find that mediator never gives his judgment. It is the parties who has got to arrive at a solution themselves, right? So no decision is being given as far as the mediation process is concerned. The advantages of mediation is that it is flexible and informal. It is voluntary. Freedom to withdraw from mediation is always there. Direct engagement in negotiation is there of the parties. Mediator is always a neutral third party. It is cost effective. It enhances the likelihood of the parties continuing their relationship during and after the proceedings, and it is confidentiality is maintained, and mediation is simple and flexible, means that is there. Now, the second thing that we have in the settlement machinery is called conciliation process. I think the time is there, so we will continue with conciliation process on the next term when we meet. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.